영적 조선인민군 장군 이른 달숫돌 만세!
It is one of the most controversial topics surrounding the Korean War. The possibility that some American soldiers were never returned and instead were forced to spend the rest of their lives in captivity. The existence of such prisoners is denied by both the North Korean regime and the U.S. government. Even so, for decades, a number of those who escaped North Korea report sightings of alleged POWs still being held captive. Some people have made it their life's work to expose what they believe is a nearly unimaginable crime. Still others discount the possibility of live POWs and offer alternative explanations for the sightings. So what is the truth? The Korean War resulted in about 36,500 Americans killed in action and over 8,000 missing. Since the end of the war, it has been possible to identify some of the missing, bringing the total down to about 7,500. The investigation process remains very slow, often stopping and starting depending on the political situation between the US and North Korea. The possibility of American POWs being held by North Korea has been taken seriously by the US government, with sighting reports initially held secret in order to protect both the source and any possible living POWs. A soldier who was 18 years old in 1953 would be 88 years old today, making it theoretically possible for POWs to still be alive. In the years following the Korean War, a number of U.S. officials believed that not all POWs had been returned. This letter was written in 1954 by Air Force Chief of Staff Nathan Twining to CIA Director Allen Dulles. The first paragraph states, quote, "An unknown but apparently substantial number of U.S. military personnel captured in the course of the Korean War are still being held by the Communist forces." The letter then asks the CIA to use all available clandestine and covert assets to locate any unreturned POWs. In 1996, the release of an internal report from the Defense Prisoner of War Missing Personnel Office caused a brief media firestorm. The report stated that there are too many live sighting reports to dismiss that there are no American POWs in North Korea, and that 10 to 15 possible POWs were being held in or around the North Korean capital, Pyongyang. It is known that the North retained many South Korean POWs after the armistice. This became an established fact when POW Cho Chong-ho escaped to the South in 1994 after more than 40 years of captivity. Cho can be seen here in South Korea removing his name from a list of war dead. To date, more than 70 South Korean POWs have been able to escape from North Korea. These men were used as slave labor and kept in isolated areas under constant surveillance. The existence of unreturned South Koreans logically raises the question, could US POWs have been retained by the North as well? Some POW sightings can be explained as simple misunderstandings, while other sightings are more compelling and cannot be easily ignored. At first glance, it might seem that any sightings of white Caucasian-looking men, especially Americans, living in North Korea could have no other explanation than the presence of unreturned POWs. However, this is not the case. As incredible as it sounds, 4 U.S. soldiers defected to North Korea between 1962 and 1965. During their time in North Korea, the 4 men taught English and even acted in movies in addition to regularly moving about the capital, Pyongyang. More than once, escapees from North Korea have described seeing American POWs when in fact the men they had seen were the 4 defectors. For example, one report describes American POWs living in a town called Namgangdong in Sungho County, located just east of the capital, Pyongyang. The men were said to be working as English teachers and were allowed to go shopping in Pyongyang, as were the defectors. The alleged POWs were given North Korean wives who fled for unknown reasons. The 4 defectors were also given North Korean wives whom were believed to be incapable of having children. However, after one of the women became pregnant, all the women were eventually taken away. This sighting may be easily attributed to the defectors, but what about those sightings that can't? One such intriguing account comes from Oh Young-nam, who defected to South Korea in 1996. He claimed to have repeatedly seen 20 to 30 black and white men alleged to be POWs living in a camp not far from Pyongyang. O claimed to have visited this camp a number of times between the years 1982 and 1993. The number of men and the fact some men were black would rule out the 4 defectors and makes this sighting report more compelling. The camp was said to be located in or near the town of Mandao Li, not far from the other 2 locations previously mentioned. At one point, O gave 6 or so cans of beer to some of the men who said thank you in Korean. North Korean escapee Kim Young described seeing several Caucasians in one of the North's prison camps in 1996. Kim was told by another inmate that these men were American and British POWs. Even if these individuals weren't POWs, their existence is still deeply troubling, as it appears foreigners were being held in the North Korean prison camp system. If so, then how did they get there? Had these men simply run afoul of the law while visiting the country? Or could they have been kidnapped? North Korea is known to have abducted people from Japan, Macau, Lebanon, Italy, and other places in Europe. Another sighting report that can't be attributed to the 4 defectors occurred in Kimchak, a small city on North Korea's upper east coast. A North Korean defector described a Caucasian man said to be a POW who lived in this city during the early 1980s. The man was about 60 years old, which means he would have been in his 30s when captured. The locals called him by the nickname Yankee, or Big Nose. The name, Big Nose, is a reference to the relatively large noses Caucasians have when compared to Koreans. The man was described as having light-colored eyes and a lot of hair, especially on his arms. Originally captured in 1950, this alleged POW escaped from a camp near the end of the war when guards began executing prisoners. At some point, either while being captured or later escaping, he suffered 3 bullet wounds in one leg which caused him to walk with a severe limp. The POW's place of capture was given as North Hamgyong Province and his place of imprisonment as South Won-Gae Province. The information given in this sighting report is specific enough that investigators should be able to determine who this man really was by interviewing people currently living in Kimchak. Someone living in the early 1980s should still be well within the living memory of the residents in the area. The problem, of course, is getting unrestricted access to Kimchak or any location in North Korea. One of the most compelling stories comes from a Romanian man named Oprica who spent time working as an engineer in North Korea. One Sunday in early October 1979, Oprica and a group of coworkers were traveling by bus to visit the International Friendship Exhibition Hall, which is located a few hours traveling time north of Pyongyang. At one point, the bus traveled through a farm where Oprica and his coworkers were shocked to see what appeared to be white Caucasian men working in a field. One of the men approached the road and locked eyes with Oprica as the bus passed by. The man was clearly Caucasian with blue or gray eyes and appeared to be about 50 years old. There were 8 or 10 other men in the field who also appeared to be Caucasian. The North Korean guides present on this excursion said that the men in the field were POWs from the Korean War. At this time, the oldest of the 4 defectors was 39 years old, whereas a soldier who was 18 years old in 1953 would be at least 44, making an age of 50 quite plausible. Years later, investigators tracked down and interviewed other passengers from the trip who were able to corroborate this sighting. In 1992, Oprica shared his story with the Senate Select Committee on POWs and MIAs.
Caucasian face. And behind them, I saw more people working in the camp.
How were they dressed and were they guarded?
They was dressed with North Korean dress, like they are POW, American POW.
You were told these other folks were American POWs that you saw alive?
Yes.
An ideal sighting would involve a first-hand encounter where a person was able to speak with the subject, obtain their name, and confirm that they were a prisoner of war who wanted to return to the U.S. This information would then be matched to a soldier listed as missing or killed in action. No such POW sightings are currently known, but at least one case comes close. This case involves first-hand testimony from a North Korean who escaped to the South and described meeting an American POW. In 1971 at Taeshan Air Base, Kim Yong-hwa met a man whom appeared to be about 40 years old and who was wearing a North Korean Army uniform with no insignia. The man was initially hesitant to talk but eventually shared some of his story. His name was John Smith and had been captured during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, which took place during September and October of 1950. While no John Smith is listed as missing from this battle, there is a John Sherman Smith who went missing at the Battle of Unsan, which took place at almost the same time 80 miles to the west of Chosin. This battle resulted in Americans and South Koreans being overrun by Chinese troops in November and December of 1950. John Sherman Smith is assumed to have been killed in action at Unsan, but his remains have not yet been recovered. The name John Smith can be considered very common, and the man Mr. Wah met may have decided to call himself that for some reason instead of giving his real name. This person must have been very familiar with the English-speaking world to know that the name John Smith is common. Despite the possible discrepancy about the place of capture, Mr. Wah appears to have met and spoken to someone claiming to be a US POW 18 years after the Korean War ended. Special thanks to YouTuber John Posey of channel John Posey 1455 for making his research and an interview with Mr. Wah available. A link to this video is included below in the show notes. The truth about American POWs held by North Korea remains uncertain. These sightings are difficult to explain and require further investigation in order to obtain a definitive answer. It has been more than 30 years since the collapse of the Soviet Union. At the time, few outside observers expected the North Korean leadership to survive the 1990s. Since then, the regime has defied all expectations by remaining in power, and there are currently no signs that it will be going anywhere anytime soon. Even worse, the addition of nuclear weapons to the North's arsenal makes the possibility of a regime change terrifying. This has led some leaders to advocate for policies which keep the status quo stable in order to lessen the chance of an all-out nuclear war that would certainly devastate South Korea, Japan, and even the US mainland. Someday, perhaps many decades into the future, a relatively peaceful regime change will occur. Only then can we expect a definitive answer to the question of unreturned POWs in North Korea. Links to some of the sources used in this video are available in the show notes below.